Why don't we get started? Hello, hi, my name is Kenice Wu. I'm the president of Plug and Play. And I want to just really start by giving you a very warm welcome to Plug and Play. I understand a number of you, this is the first time you've been here, so I hope you enjoyed this event and very excited for this event. Let me just maybe give you a quick introduction about Plug and Play. So Plug and Play is a business accelerator where we really help accelerate a startup's journey and help accelerate the journey as well as improve the chance of success. I'll explain kind of the 5 pillars of how we do that, but just give you a sense, we look at on the average every year about 3,000 business plans, of which this facility and 2 other facilities in Northern California houses about 300 startups and growth stage companies. And we basically have had a lot of interesting successes throughout the years. So we've been around about 5 years. The way I describe it about Plug and Play is that we have the 5 pillars in terms of how we help accelerate a startup's experience. The first is really what does a startup need? It needs capital. So we provide access to capital via a network of about 170 venture capital firms, angel groups, angel investors. Plug and Play itself also has an investment fund that we co-invest with our investment partners. So after funding, the next thing is you need to build a great team. So we have a talent acquisition group that can help find great basically partners for the entrepreneurs, as well as we also have an executive in residence program where these are experienced executives that really help mentor companies and really provide them advice and help them along the way. The third I would describe as really our corporate partnerships or our corporate relationships. This is where we really find the best match of startups and what corporations are looking for. Whether is it in terms of from a strategic nature, whether is it a partnership or licensing, or possibly an acquisition or investment, but also in terms of we have a number of partners like Navtech that leverage the partnership program to attract developers onto their platform. And we'll be glad to work with corporate partners to build their environment in the community as well. The fourth one is what we call access to Silicon Valley Network, where through not only the community of the entrepreneurs and the corporate partners and investors, but also events. This is an example of an event right here. We have about 120 events a year at Plug and Play. Sometimes it feels like we have 100 networking events a day here. So there's literally been, this is already the 3rd event this week at this place. So it's a very vibrant community. And then the 5th one I was described is really our resources for the startups. We have this facility. We have also 2 other facilities that we can provide very flexible office space. We have a data center. We have IT services, a lot of service partners to help the startups, whatever they need to really get going so they can focus on their business. I want to just highlight one important area of focus for Plug and Play, which is I'll describe the centers of excellence. This is Center of Excellence is really an aggregation of, I would say, innovators and entrepreneurs, investors, corporate partners, governments, as well as experts to really build a vibrant community. We have events like this that we really bring the community together formally, as well as also informally, a lot of meetup events as well. We also have demo centers where we really showcase world-class technology and solutions, and also an advisory board for these centers of excellence. And really the 4 major centers of excellence what Plug and Play is focused on is one is in the area of mobile. This is really mobile solutions, mobile infrastructure solutions, applications. A second area is very important for us is cloud computing. This is the cloud platform infrastructure, as well as solutions, whether it's business to business or business to consumer. Number 3 will be digital media. This is really social networking, media, video, gaming, social gaming, the whole area that's very, very vibrant here. And the 4th is smart grid, right? This is a new area for us, but we're very excited about the smart grid. And this is really our first major event in smart grid this year. And it's also, we're going to launch the Smart Grid Center of Excellence today. So very, very excited and very excited that you're all here. So I want to introduce really the MC and the lead of our Smart Grid Center of Excellence. It's a lady named Christine Herzog. A number of you know her already. She is the author of the Smart Grid Dictionary, and we're fortunate to have her and to have her help us and to lead this effort. And she will lead the whole event for today. So please join me in welcoming Christine. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, but a lot of new faces as well, and that's great because this is supposed to be a mashup. As you may know from the music industry, that means where you take two different songs and put them together, and that's what we're intending to do here, because for the plug-and-play community, we hope that you'll learn about smart grid issues and think about how your solutions can perhaps be repurposed so that they can address some smart grid issues. And for the smart grid community people that are here, you'll be exposed to new startups and to other PMP areas of technology strengths, and we hope that you'll find perhaps some new answers to your existing challenges. So without much more time here, I'd really like to get us into the event itself. We have a very impressive list of panelists and speakers today and startup presenters. And one thing I just did want to point out to you is that our presenters don't necessarily represent the status quo. So you're going to be exposed to some pretty revolutionary thinking today over the course of this day. So without further ado, I'd like to provide an introduction for our first speaker, David Dowdett, and he is the principal with the Industry Solutions Practice for Utilities at AT&T. He brings over 38 years of utility and telecom experience specializing in heavy AMR and AMI process, which means automated meter reading and automatic metering infrastructure. And he has much experience in building joint ventures and utility-owned business units with infrastructure to support meter and network asset management. And he's also managed quite a number of utility customer sales and support groups. I could go on, but instead I'd just rather turn over the mic to David now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the generous opportunity to be here to speak with you today. And what I'm going to do is try to expose you a little bit to some of the kinds of things that are happening in the industry, what we at AT&T and the telecommunications industry in general have been doing with utilities, and maybe give you some insight into some of the opportunities that will present themselves. So with that, I'm going to see if I can do my magic here. If you hit the forward button, I've learned it works really well. Okay, so one of the things we like to think of in the utility space is that telecommunications and utilities have a lot of commonalities. We both face regulation from similar regulators at a state level and a federal level. We have network issues, albeit telecommunications we think is more complicated than energy, but if you talk to the energy folks, they'll argue that point with you. But the analogy I guess I'd like to draw for you is that utilities today are faced with something very unique. They're taking a 150-year-old infrastructure and trying to migrate it to the 21st century. They're trying to go from the analog world to the digital world, if you will. And I was trying to explain this to my son, and he said, well, Dad, what does that really mean? I said, it's like trying to change the tire on a bus while it's driving. You can't exactly turn it off or put it in the shop and work on it. It has to stay operational. So utilities are facing these kinds of things. We face them with our network in different ways. They're facing them with their network. So from a overview, I guess, utilities are faced with a lot of pressures today that many of us probably didn't give a whole lot of thought to, but there's everything from the regulatory environment, and for those of you from the state of California, if you follow this much, one of the local electric utilities here in the Bay Area got snarled up with smart grid and with some communications issues, and the end result was that it went all the way to the state legislature and the Public Utilities Commission to allow consumers to opt out of the smart grid, not utilize the benefits that were available to them. And quite frankly, that's sad because there are so many benefits. So collectively as an organization, we're all trying to work through that to provide the famous what's in it for me, because that's what the consumer is asking. From a utility viewpoint, pressures that they're feeling with aging infrastructure, certainly, trying to get more out of less. Interesting note, Governor Brown in the state of California on Tuesday of this week signed into law legislation that said by the year 2019, 33% of all of the energy consumed in the state of California will be from renewable sources. That's huge. And by the way, hydro is not renewable. Go figure that one out. I'm from the Seattle area, and to me, hydro is every bit renewable. We got lots of it, but we have dry rain too. So certainly coal-fired, and that was a little attempted humor, and nobody laughed. Okay. And I got to turn the page here because the jokes are out, and then we'll get back to be serious about this. Okay, so I guess the point being is that we've got safety issues to deal with, the regulatory thing, we've got the constituency issues, and we've got an aging infrastructure and a finite resource that we're delivering today. So we have to deliver that in a more efficient manner. And that's one of the things that's opened up smart grid. And if you'll think of this with the same amount of production today of energy, of electricity, let us say, on an improved smart grid, you could drive an additional 20% of capacity out of the system, because there's so many inefficiencies in this older technology. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. How many of you in this room know what smart grid is, what it's all about? Well, good. And there's a few that don't, so I'm going to take just a second and talk about that. In the world of distribution, smart grid is not a meter. Smart grid is much more than metering. Smart grid represents all of the command and control, the components, all of the pieces, the software, the interoperability, you'll hear that term. All of that fits together to form the smart grid, to allow a two-way communication system to more efficiently use what is available, to deliver it in a more reliable fashion, and to provide end benefit to the consumers. And that's in a nutshell what it's all about. So we look at it before. Remember, some of us remember, old Floyd came by with the route book, and he'd open it up the page, and he'd say, oh, there's where David Douthit lives, the cul-de-sac that time forgot. That's his meter, and they write down what the reading is. Well, today it's all done electronically. It's a two-way situation, and if David doesn't pay his bill, they could turn the power off. Or look at it another way, they can determine if the power is off and it should be on. Those are benefits. Okay, so automation, reliability, take the manual part of it away, provide control, and, oh, here's something new. Never had to worry about this before, security. We had physical security, certainly. That's the high fences around the substations. What about cybersecurity? As soon as you open up a two-way communications channel, you create a pathway, potentially, for people who have less than honorable intentions to go in and do things that are less than honorable to a distribution network. And so consequently, the federal government has mandated, the state governments have mandated, the industry has mandated, and the consumers have demanded that there be some kind of level of security built into this so that someone could not go sit down at the local hotspot and get on a laptop computer and hack the network and shut the grid down. Very, very important thing. Part of our national defense, it's actually got Homeland Security tied into it as well. So, hot buttons for the utilities. First and foremost is AMI, which has now become smart grid. That's to get the apparatus into the field to make it happen. That opens up a lot of opportunities. It's not just the meter, it's all the pieces that go with it. And then what do you do with it when you start collecting the information? If you think about this, when I read the meter once a month or once a quarter for revenue read, it was one reading. Today I might be looking at it every 15 minutes. That's 96 pieces of information a day times the number of meters in your system, and I'm going to keep that information forever. So now all of a sudden we have to scale. We have to scale the storage. So you're going to hear cloud computing and cloud storage and hosting and all of those things to deal with the data in a secure fashion. Well, then that leads to a discussion on business continuity and disaster recovery and that sort of thing. We're looking at, I have this information, what am I going to do with it? So we need data mining capability to analyze what I have, to be able to quickly find the answers to the questions. whether it be for rate planning or to determine load calculations, all of those kinds of things that fits into it. So very important meter data management systems. You're going to hear a lot about demand response being the euphemism for I want to go out and do things in the grid, and that could be everything from determine an outage to power quality monitoring, load calculations, transformer health. I'll give you a quick example. If I don't have a good system and everyone buys an electric vehicle, and those are coming, by the way, and you're going to see a lot of them on the West Coast before you see them elsewhere. I'll go back to the cul-de-sac that time forgot, where I live, and all 10 homes on the cul-de-sac bought an electric car. We all plugged it in to charge them at the same time. We blew the transformer off the pole because we forgot to tell the utility that, oh my goodness, there's a load there that you hadn't calculated. Smart grid can help alleviate that. Home automation is coming. It's well underway, but it opens up a whole new area for software and hardware platforms to help consumers manage what they have, help the utilities manage what they're delivering, and quite frankly, the quality of life that we have. And we'll spend some time after this session visiting and talking about that. And then lastly, let's not forget, I got to deliver an accurate bill. If I have a good system, I can do that, all right? Okay, so from a telecommunications viewpoint, we play in a lot of spaces. And I want you to think in terms of something beyond your father's BlackBerry. At one time it was wireline services, and then it became mobility or wireless services. And everybody had one of these, right? Everybody got one of these on them? Did you all put them on vibrate or silent so that it doesn't interrupt my talk? Okay. Well, if you're really cool, you have two of them, right? But you got to be cool to have two. Okay. We're tethered. You can't escape. My boss can reach out and touch me anytime he wants to, and he does. My point being is that we're hungry for access, we're hungry for information, we're hungry for that connection. So in the telecommunications business, we're involved in that, certainly, traditional voice. Now we get into the world of data, and with smart grid, there's all manner of data and things that are out there that need to be collected and managed, and there need to be systems to deal with that. We like to think we're involved in that. You'll hear the term interoperability, which is code for everything has to kind of work together. So think of Microsoft and think of it as Apple working together seamlessly with Android on a seamless platform that looks something like this. Is that possible today? Not yet. In somebody's mind, maybe. We'd like to think that can happen. Okay. We're involved in communications, data transport, machine to machine, cloud computing, hosting, storage. We play in that space with utilities with specialized offerings. The smart grid is a huge piece of this, and it represents everything from the modernization of the distribution network all the way through what's going on at generation and transmission. Again, getting more out of existing without having to build new sources of generation. Okay, now I promised our folks in the marketing group that I would do some statistics. So now this is when you start writing stuff down. And I have to refer to the tablet because I decided that I wasn't going to memorize this part. Smart grid growth by the year 2015, we expect to see it almost double. This is according to the Green Tech Media folks. They put a study together and they said by 2015 the smart grid will represent about $9.6 billion in opportunity. Talking about the automatic metering infrastructure portion and the transition through smart grid. The AMI piece is going to taper off, smart grid is going to go up. Distribution automation is going to replace AMI. And distribution automation represents about $5.6 billion worth of opportunity in the short term. Home area networks only cover 6% of the homes in America today. It's a huge growth area, not only in smart grid but elsewhere. And we think that the whole smart grid enterprise in general is just going to grow like crazy. So let's talk a little bit about this. Here's a little graphic that shows the distribution network for a typical electric utility. It shows transmission, it shows generation, it shows distribution, it shows the end users. And there's fancy words up there like banks, synchrophasers. What does all that mean? It just means that they're devices that require two-way communications to provide quality service, reliable service, notify outage, that sort of thing. you can have a play in that because, believe me, the utilities are hungry for solutions to meet some of the issues that are being created by this. Distribution automation is or referred to as DA sometimes, and there's a whole bunch of components to it. And I mean, we could spend a whole 6-hour seminar just talking about it, but fundamentally it starts out with substation activity and sensors and hardware and software, everything from security to power quality. And oh yes, new term, distributed generation. How about that for a new one? That means I'm going to have a solar array on my house, and the utility has no choice. They're going to buy that energy from me. And they're going to put it and use it and pay me a premium. And then at nighttime, when I need energy because it's dark outside, I'll buy it back at a lower rate. The goal being that maybe I could be at a lower energy bill, maybe even net positive. Distributed generation represents a whole new era for us, a whole new platform for us. You can have a play in that. And we get into other things, line sensors and fault indicators and all kinds of technical things that the industry uses. And let me tell you, all of it is analog today, and it's being reinvented and repurposed. People are doing things with software today that they never dreamed was possible, eliminating the need for some hardware. Kind of an interesting thing. Ultimately, you get to the AMI piece, which is the consumer, the meter. And oh, by the way, we have disconnect devices, we have load control devices. So did you know that in a true smart grid, if I shut your refrigerator off for 5 minutes, you'd never see it, would you? Unless you were looking for a sandwich or something and the lights were out. But think about it. Would the refrigerator lose power would it, if it was off for 5 minutes? Would that hurt anything? No. Same thing with the freezer. Hot water tank, you can shut it down for 10 or 15 minutes. My daughter's living proof. She takes a 20-minute shower and it doesn't run out of water. Of course, we have a tank about the size of the state of Montana, but that has nothing to do with anything. My point being is that I can shed load around, and if I turned off 100,000 hot water tanks for 5 minutes and I roll that around, or I took an air conditioner and shut off the compressor section for 5 minutes, left the fans going, it's good. And I can lower my load, all right? Opportunity in that arena. Just want you to know there's a lot of people already playing in this game. And on the software side, I'm sure there's a couple of names you may have seen up there. On the hardware side, everything from electric vehicles to the meter companies to the outage advisors, different people doing things. The network looks like something like this. So you can see from our viewpoint, the fully integrated network has storage, it has hosting, it has wireless, wireline, consulting, all manner of networking, employee safety, it goes on, and we'll talk about those offline if you'd like. And then finally, because I'm running out of time, I have one last thing to say, because that is my last slide. I wanted to show something to you to show you that things are moving, okay? I brought this along because the utilities think this thing is the greatest thing since sliced bread. What does that look like to you? Well, it does look like a BlackBerry, actually. More generically, a smartphone. Did you know this is also a satellite phone? Now, our network is the most reliable in the world. You know that. We never have outages. You know that as well. But once in a while, if something like that happens, what do you do if you're a utility and you have to have communications? It's mission critical. Well, I can use this for my day-to-day stuff. If the network goes funny, I hit one button, I now talk to the satellite. Just dial it up, I can do my Outlook, I can surf the web, make dinner reservations, all through the satellite. And if you get into one of those areas that's maybe on the fringe or kind of out of range, or you think you're in trouble, they make this very handsome, attractive case with a, not for me, but utilities are using it. And lastly, what's this? Smartphone, thank you very much. It's a dual core processor smartphone. What's this? Well, it looks like a notebook. It's actually a dumb terminal. And I can take this phone and I can snap it on the back of this. And all of a sudden now what I have is a telephone that becomes a computer. So utilities are using these in the field. The worker goes back to the truck, snaps it in the truck, and he now has a terminal they can use to communicate. One device. Plus more software applications and opportunities than you can imagine. So that's all I have to say about that. I've gone over. The red light is blinking. I can see the hook coming, so I'm out of here. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And thanks again. He was a stand-in for Glenn Lurie, so we really appreciate him being able to change his schedule and come out here at kind of the last minute. So next I want to introduce Kurt Yeager. Kurt Yeager is the executive director with the Galvin Electricity Initiative, and he joined them back in 2005, shortly after it was launched by former Motorola chief Bob Galvin. As his leader, he works with electricity experts, innovators, and entrepreneurs to design and build perfect power system models of a smart, efficient, and electric power system that cannot fail the consumer. He also leads the initiative in driving the electricity policy changes that are necessary for system transformation at the state and federal levels. Prior to that, he served as the president and chief executive officer of the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI, retiring in 2004 after 30 years with the organization. And he evolved that organization from a nonprofit industry think tank to a family of companies that undertake proprietary and collaborative research and development for the electric power industry in the U.S. and 40 other countries. So I'd like to, without further ado, bring up Kurt to give a talk about the future of electricity. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Christine, for that very nice introduction, and thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today, because I've spent most of my career here in Silicon Valley, even before it was called Silicon Valley. But to me, it is the very foundation and the engine of the transformation that David so clearly described and comprehensively described. In fact, I thought he did a wonderful job of really giving you the sense of what is the scope of the true, I prefer the term, intelligent grid transformation. Look in the dictionary, the word smart is not necessarily one I'd want to put on my electricity system. I don't need a smart aleck. Intelligent, the ability to anticipate and react quickly and successfully to change, is precisely what we need by our power system today. Today, the system is the equivalent of a railroad that would take 10 days to open or close a switch. All of us would, and even my very young grandchildren, say that'd be the dumbest thing in the world. Yes, it would. But that is the electricity railroad that we have today until we transform it into a 21st century digital system. And it's remarkable. The fact that electricity is the foundation for our economy and the foundation for the digital transformation. It is the last industry to absorb this. And so I really want to just take a few minutes to talk about what I think are some of the pacing issues for the transformation. And first and foremost, going back to what Thomas Edison so wisely said over a century ago, that electricity is a consumer-based enterprise, service-based enterprise. That is exactly right. At his time, the technology didn't exist to do that. But we are today operating a system that still has a technology base of over 100 years old, and the policy base goes back to the middle of the Depression, when we decided that we needed to electrify this country to get out of the Depression. Absolutely right. And creating monopoly business model to create the infrastructure was the right thing to do. But we finished that job 50 years ago, but we're still operating within that same model, which rewards utilities today continuously for the quantity of electricity they produce, not the quality. And just as Bob Galvin, and had the pleasure of working with now and knowing for many years, said, well, that's where telecommunications was 30 years ago. A lot of pent-up innovation and a regulated monopoly business model that has no incentive to innovate. And that's where we are with the utilities today. Not the utilities are bad people. They've done a wonderful job of maintaining this very obsolete power system we have. But the time is long past that we need to transform, because this system today is literally, through its unreliability, inefficiency, and the jobs that we are losing in this country. We have become the largest exporter of jobs in the world. And a major factor in that is the electricity system and its inadequacy, which, not my numbers, but if you take federal numbers and add them all up, you come up that it's costing this country nearly $1 trillion a year. A year. The cost of the transformation of all the technologies that David underscored would be less than $500 million. So the benefit to cost ratio here is immensely large. And if we open the door to allow the great companies here in Silicon Valley and elsewhere to really operate in that market as they have in the internet, we would have economic benefits that would go tremendously beyond my imagination. We need the electricity equivalent of the internet. And you and companies like you are the ones who can create it if we could open the door and if we get the inventor. In fact, that's basically what we are. Today, we're still in a business model whose basic principle is, from the middle of the 20th century, to power and light ratepayers. Today, the business model must be one of empowering and delighting customers. And I'm delighted to see more and more utilities express their frustration that say that we know very little about customers today, and we have no regulatory incentive to consider them anything other than simply ratepayers. So both utilities and customers are trapped on either side of a policy and technology iron curtain that separates supply and demand. Supply and demand must be seamlessly integrated, and you as a customer must be in a position to manage your affairs and your energy use as you see fit to your best advantage, and you must have the incentives to do so. And as the technology moves forward, you can also be a producer and sell power to the system. So gaining customer acceptance is the key here, is opening the door and engaging through dynamic electricity rates. Most people don't know that the cost of electricity varies by a factor of 10 or more over the course of the day. If you knew that, and your systems in your home through home automation could automatically respond to that, you would save immense amounts of energy and money in the process. 30 to 40% are typically what has been done in the demonstrations. And the technology is there to make that possible, and not to force it down everyone's throat. Not everyone bought a cell phone the day they came on, or a laptop computer, but to open the door and allow the early adopters to have the technology and the means to demonstrate to their families, their friends, to the community, the real benefits here. And that's how we will build this business. Motivating them, people then, these adopters, through savings with totally automated, customer-friendly applications. Not having to look at meters and so forth, but all automatic. And as David said, the technology is there, and we can do that literally with cell phones. And the internet is certainly the key. And then delighting these users through easy, enjoyable, and fulfilling experiences. That is really the key to what we need to do if we're ever going to achieve the smart grid. The smart grid is not just about, in fact, not primarily about marginal savings in people's electricity bills. It is about the transformation and the creation of jobs in a globally competitive market where we are falling farther and farther behind our competitors. I have the privilege of traveling and moving around the world quite a bit on this topic, and I can assure you that our competitors and our friends, if you will, around the world are much more progressive. They're not doing it perfectly from my perspective. We still have a lot of opportunity to take the lead, but because of their incentives to build their economies, not try to maintain the status quo, they are moving more aggressively in this regard than we are, and are going to become the leaders unless we pick up the ball. So the implications, the policy implications here to that, and again, I remind everyone that electricity is the lifeblood of our economy, is to focus on customer societal benefits in policies. And really, and all of us must stand up and have a common denominator. We may all be competitors ultimately. You all may be competitors. I'm not going to be a competitor. But competitors in the market, but we've got to create this market. And the market has to begin by opening it up to have this seamless connection of supply and demand and enabling customers to be customers, not captive ratepayers. So you need to seamlessly connect supply and demand. You need to empower consumers with the rules and tools and dynamic pricing and the tools to use that dynamic pricing as they see most effective from their perspective. And we must help utilities deal with the inevitable here because, as I say, the cost-benefit ratio is so large that there's no reason anyone should be pushed out of business. AT&T makes a lot more money today than they did selling black rotary dial phones, although at the time they were absolutely committed to staying in black rotary dial phone business, as many of you well know. And that's where utilities are today because they have no incentive to change. But we need to assure universal real-time pricing, that's open to everyone. Everyone gets it. You own that. It's your information. You should have that. You should demand as a customer, this is my information. You have no right to deny me access to that information. We need the ability to have utilities have performance-based rate structures. Now, again, based on the quality of service, not the quantity of service. Performance-based rates. Where this has been demonstrated, there are a number of places. San Diego Gas and Electric is a very good example of a utility that is making more money for its stockholders today than it was in the old days, even though it's selling less electricity, because it has determined how to improve the quality of service and get paid for that. Again, it's not going to be the number of kilowatt hours sold, but the quality and value of each kilowatt hour that is going to ultimately determine the future of our business and the future of our country. And we are focused on distributed generation microgrids because, as was pointed out by David, the distribution system, this is not, a smart grid is not about just meters, which are, frankly, any time you take any one of these small dimensions and put it in place without the big picture, you're likely to set things back. A smart meter is not a tool for giving utilities more information so that they can raise your electricity bill. It's a tool to allow you to be a partner with the utility in how you use electricity most effectively from your standpoint as a customer. So it's on the local distribution system, and we are focusing with communities around the country, a number of which who, because they are not only their customers but also their stockholders, one and the same, they have the incentive and are moving rather dramatically to incorporate and move towards what we would call perfect power service. So distributed generation microgrids, which again is bring out the distributed generation, allow the communities to become key factors here. And here in California, a major factor has been community aggregation. And it's interesting that the local utility here, Pacific Gas and Electric, spent some $45 million trying to kill that law at the last in the last general election, and fortunately they failed. And so community aggregation, and Marin County is leader in this, is one of the important vehicles to give communities the opportunity to control their load and develop really a most cost beneficial system for their customers and their people who live in the community, excuse me. And then finally, retail service competition. This is not, Texas is giving a lot of for retail competition, but retail competition in terms of value is not fundamentally whether you have 5 or 6 sources to go buy bulk energy. It's, do I have the tools? Can I go out and buy from Home Depot or wherever the system or lease it that will allow me to use my electricity most effectively in my home or business? That is retail service competition. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to put some of these thoughts out on the table, and I look forward to the discussion and the debate and so forth that may follow as a result. But again, I would say the technology is there today. Technology is not the limiting factor. It is getting all of us who are engaged in this to really demand that the policies be changed. This system, unlike telecommunications, is regulated at the state level, and so we have 52 different rules and regulations, sets and regulations and so forth, and a federal government that is very reluctant to step in what they call states' rights. And I certainly am a strong believer in states' rights, but I think we have a federal government to correct states' wrongs. And right now, they are not taking, we need to be beginning, a long time ago really, but we need to really be demanding that standards be set, control requirements be set, to which the states are held accountable. I don't want the federal government to run the system, but I want them to establish the standards of performance, reliability, efficiency, consumer empowerment. And we are creating what we call the Smart Grid Seal of Approval, a set of criteria covering all of these by which municipalities, utilities, and all can measure and communicate their product. And most of all, the consumer can see what it is. It's in very tangible terms because nobody really cares that much about an electricity grid, knows very much about it. We're not going to teach them. You've got to show them what's working and what's not working that they can relate to, and how easy and cost effectively it can be transformed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt. Really appreciate that, and very thought-provoking. I'd like to invite the next panel to come up, which will be talking about utility operations, the issues and challenges. So you can get, you can walk up right behind me here. I'll just give a brief introduction first of the moderator, who is Robin Carey. She is the CEO of Social Media Today. And she founded this company to manage online B2B communities that connect large organizations with people they want to influence. She's a veteran of the big book print media world, including Fortune, Newsweek, and Businessweek, and built her reputation on architecting powerful strategies for blue-chip corporate clients that delivered ways to corral and connect their customers and their customers' trusted influencers. So Social Media Today is the first platform and quickly became one of the leading communities for journalists and marketers looking to exchange information on this brave new world of social media, followed by the Energy Collective, which is a leading aggregation of international energy experts, and other platforms such as My Venture Pad, the Social Customer, Sustainable Cities Collective, the Customer Collective, Governing People, and so on. So I'd like to turn it over to Robin, and she'll then get her panel up here.
Yeah, where's my panel? Come on up, guys. And I don't know if it's clear, I'm the CEO of Social Media Today. One of the 10 sites that we have is called the Energy Collective. Don't give me your business card today because you will get an invitation to join our conversation there. And we've been looking, we have a number of leading experts on smart grid. But we look at smart grid in the context of the total energy policy of the entire world, no small order. And we have the best bloggers anywhere on these topics, and I invite you, if you're blogging, to join. If you're not blogging, then come on down anyway and comment and be part of the bigger conversation. The New York Times, Andy Revkin, calls us a valuable aggregator. We are more than an aggregator, though. We create a lot of original content, particularly some really good downloads on smart grid, and we have a webinar coming up May 3rd, which you should look at, which will be about smart grid and particularly about demand response. Before we get started, I just have a quick poll. How many people in this room are primarily interested in smart grid because of its opportunities for data management, CRM, and that kind? I mean, do you see the opportunity with the data? Show of hands. Okay. How about opportunities for infrastructure? Great. Okay, and then smart grids and other kinds of hardware. Okay, less so. So this is a software community out here. That's very interesting. Okay. Let me quickly tell you just a little bit about, I think I've already told you everything you need to know about the Energy Collective. One of the things that's very important is that unlike what's happening in social media as a whole in many places, we are editorially independent. We've been very generously funded by Siemens Corporation for this site, but Siemens tells us nothing, doesn't tell us what to do. And we feel that that's an important part of, of sort of social media and online community, that communities be able to operate independently. And here's the connecting tissue right here if you want to check us out, add your blog, or follow us on Twitter. So without further ado, and also just quickly, we want to, each of the panelists is going to give a brief introduction to the topic, but then we want to spend as much time as possible today getting your questions. So then we'll turn it over to the audience to really run this show. My first panelist is from GE Energy, Michelle Lesh. She's Regional Sales Director out here in the most important market for smart grid around, out here in California. And she's also been a regional forecasting leader at GE Energy. She's been really an evangelist at a company that's been known to be one of the major leaders around the world on smart grid. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
I think we'd like to
Stay here?
Continue to sit.
Sit,
if you don't
all right.
mind. That way
No
we can get
problem.
through a little more quickly.
No problem. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. I'm going to reiterate a lot of the messages that you've already heard from the previous speakers. We're seeing some of the same challenges, and I just want to highlight some of the things that we see from my customer base. The data management, when I think about smart grid, the first thing I think of and our customers think of is the data that's going to come out of all of these technologies. We talked earlier about the fact that we're going from 1 meter read a month to possibly 1 every 15 minutes. What do you do with that information? Utility companies are not in the business of managing data centers. They may not be in the business of understanding all the analytics and visualization that's needed to make intelligent decisions with all of that information. So when we think of one of the opportunities for you guys as a community, it's understanding what do we do with that data, especially as we look towards cloud-based solutions, cybersecurity, making sure that it's protected and the ratepayers and the consumers understand what's going on. The other piece that we've talked about is that customer awareness and customer understanding of what smart grid is. We did a survey last summer and identified that almost 80% of respondents did not know what smart grid was. They didn't understand what it was. They'd not even heard the term. So getting them educated and able to understand what it means, what happens when I turn the switch on, what happens and how does power actually get from the plant to my house, and then empowering them to make good decisions about their energy usage. And you've got to have policies and rate structures that incentivize them to make those choices. And you've got to have the right timing such that if you give them the rate structure, but you don't give them the tools to manage their energy, then you've got upset customers. And vice versa. You can give them all the tools, but if you don't incentivize them, there's no reason to embrace smart grid. And then we also touched on the idea of standards and interoperability, making sure that everything that you develop and do has some basis in standards. Utilities are very slow to adopt new technologies. And if you start doing non-standard, not off-the-shelf products, then they're going to be less incentivized to keep moving forward.
Terrific. Thanks, Michelle. Our next speaker is John Skinner, who's the investment manager at Intel Capital looking at smart grid. And he's also director of Ecotech Development and Policy, which is a very cool idea, and a member of the Silicon Valley chapter at Keiretsu Forum. John, talk to us about investments.
Sure. So looking at this from a venture capitalist perspective, we see the smart grid as a large and growing opportunity, but I think we got to calibrate ourselves on how fast the opportunity is growing. This is some data from IDC, which shows that if you combine all the hardware, software, and services, it's on the order of $7 billion, $10 billion opportunity today in North America, growing to about $17 billion in North America by 2013. If you multiply that by 4, you get a global opportunity of about $70 billion or so. So this is a long-term secular growth opportunity. CAGRs in the range of 10 to 20%. This is not a hyper-growth industry, so we got to make sure that we're making our investments and planning our business models to treat this as a marathon as opposed to a sprint. No pun intended. But it is a very large and growing opportunity. We were asked as a panel to identify what we thought were some of the 3 challenges facing utilities, consumers, and others in the industry around smart grid and where the opportunities might be for entrepreneurs. And this is not a complete list, but just the 3 that I came up with. As David talked about earlier, I think we're all familiar with the problems that some utilities have run into in terms of engendering consumer support for smart meters and smart grid. We've had some backlash and some other issues. But this is a problem that we believe can be solved by smart people in the entrepreneurial community who have done this before, who have figured out ways to make consumers not only comfortable with technology, but actually want to bring technology more into their lives in order to be able to network with other people, to solve problems. And so one of the opportunities that we have identified, and this is still kind of hanging out there as one to solve, is how do we engender mass consumer support for smart grid? And we believe that the way to do this is to harness some of the information and communication technologies that we already have by making energy more personal. by making sure that people's privacy is protected as we begin to collect data from their smart meters. To, as Michelle mentioned, to empower them with information so they can make smarter decisions about their energy use. And also to take advantage of social networks and communities. One startup company that has done this fairly effectively is O-Power, which has harnessed the science of behavioral psychology and using social norms in order to enable people to see how their energy use compares with others in their community, in their neighborhood, people with similar size houses. So harnessing the idea of social norms and behavioral science is an opportunity, I think, for those of us in the information technology community. Another opportunity is how are we going to build an energy infrastructure, as was described by some of the earlier speakers, as one that can operate in real time, but is also secure and very flexible. The metaphor here, if you're from the computing industry, is we got to move the smart grid from a mainframe and terminal type of architecture to one that is multi-tier, where there's going to be intelligence pushed out to the edges. The dual-core processor that you have in your smartphone today is more powerful than the microprocessor that was in a Silicon Graphics workstation 10 years ago. So the intelligence that is going to be pushed out to the edge here into transformers, into home area networks, into devices within the grid is going to be something that the utility industry is going to need a lot of help doing. And this is where the entrepreneurship opportunity comes into play. Utilities typically do not have large R&D departments. Information and communication technologies is not necessarily their core competency. So they're going to rely on a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of information technology know-how to figure out how to put in place these real-time networks to do real-time energy. And then sort of the last opportunity category is, as Michelle was talking about, how are we going to take advantage of this explosion of data that's going to be coming off of these, all of the, not only the meters, but the millions and billions of sensors that are going to be deployed across the smart grid. All of these intelligent systems are going to be collecting data. How can we create value out of that data? So again, a big opportunity for entrepreneurs. If you have a background in data mining or analytics, the smart grid needs you, because again, these are the types of competencies that aren't necessarily incumbent within the energy industry, and so we need to bring the information and communications and technology industry together to help them address some of these opportunities. Just really briefly, kind of drilling down on each of these, if we look at engaging consumers, this is just an example of the type of device that we're seeing in the market today. This was a proof of concept that Intel put together, but it's basically an iPad-type device that engages people in more than just home energy management. And that's one of the, I think, the key learnings here is that things like home energy management aren't necessarily devices. They're applications that would run on an iPad or a device like this or something else. It's part of your daily life. It's not something that you take time out of necessarily to go do, but it's integrated with what you do. We make energy just as much a part of your personal life as going onto Facebook and seeing what your friends are up to. But again, we have the opportunity to use information technology to help people see how their energy use compares to their neighbors. Companies like O-Power are doing this already. And then enabling these information technologies to connect to the broader infrastructure, perhaps even to the utility demand response center, so that we can do some of the things that David was talking about, where we can actually be able to manage peaks that might occur in the grid, for example, when everybody comes home at 6 o'clock at night and plugs in their EV at the same time. Another example of how we might harness information technology is in the workplace. And this is another concept that Intel's come up with. We call the personal office energy manager. But it's basically collecting all the ambient data that is going to exist within office buildings, within cubicles, and giving people feedback on how they might be using energy in their immediate vicinity with their task lights on and other things in their cubicle. These types of dashboards and feedback loops are going to become more commonplace. And then with regard to how are we going to harness all this data, as we begin to add all these distributed renewables and electric vehicles and other smart subsystems, the complexity of the grid is going to increase enormously. And so this is the result of some research done by the US Department of Energy, which says we absolutely have to move from this centralized command and control architecture to more of a decentralized distributed architecture. And this is, again, going to require analytics to exist not only in the back end or up in the cloud, but in the actual infrastructure itself. We're going to see dedicated computers and substations that are able to do analytics locally on what's going on in that neighborhood and be able to do things like we talked about, managing EV charging and so forth. So this is just an example of the type of embedded server that we're going to see going into substations. This is from a customer of Intel's in Taiwan, Moxa. I want to close by just highlighting some of the areas in which Intel Capital is investing. There's some common themes here. There's huge opportunities for information and communication technologies in smart grid management. Companies like GridNet, which are basically started up by former entrepreneurs at Cisco and Microsoft and other companies. C-Power was a company that we invested in that did demand response. Their president was a former executive at SAP. I think you're starting to see a theme here. The information technology industry has a lot to bring to the energy industry, and we're investing in those companies that are able to bring together energy industry understanding and experience together with information technology competency.
John, what you're saying about pushing decision-making and data down to a more distributed level would seem to argue against what Kurt was talking about, which was, greater federal control, or are those two things not in conflict?
Well, we need federal incentives to catalyze the development of smart grid. But one of the key things that we often look at as investors is the entrepreneur going after the public smart grid opportunity or the regulated smart grid, where the innovation, as was described earlier, sort of moving at the pace of regulators? Or are they going after what I call the private smart grid, which is taking a lot of the same sensor technologies, same computing technologies, communication technologies, and deploying them in the private sector, in private property, inside of commercial buildings, inside of homes?
Right.
Some consumers aren't going to wait for the utility to provide them with a way to manage their energy in their home. They're going to go down to Best Buy and purchase it. So there's this kind of dual track of a certain pace going at in the public smart grid at the pace of regulators, but there's huge opportunities for information communication technology to conserve energy in the private sector, and that one is moving much more quickly.
Okay, thank you. And next up, and then we'll turn this over to questions, is Brian Huey, who's Head of Strategy and Business Development for M2M Smart Grid at Sprint. And Brian, I know you have some really interesting stuff to show us, but you want to build on that? I mean, Sprint hasn't had to worry about this federal state thing, but...
Well, I think there's room for both. For instance, for those of you that are really deep in the utility industry, I don't think you're going to be managing a fax system, a flexible AC transmission system through a substation end node. But with that being said, one of the areas I wanted to talk about was the opportunity for application development within the meter and within in-premise devices. I can tell you, being in business development, I see a lot of activity in that space where people are trying to solve the presentation to the customer, what Kurt was saying, making it easy and repeatable to consume and digest. And in fact, I have a slide about the Best Buy home energy management and the pace of regulation a little bit deeper into my deck, and we'll cover that. But when I was asked to come on the panel, I was thinking, well, what can I offer the audience? What would be the best things for you to take away? We could talk ad nauseum about distribution automation, demand response. But from our perspective at Sprint, I was just meeting a large integration provider down at our Burlingame Center, and we were talking about these very same issues this morning. And clearly, when the question was asked, how many are you interested in data analysis? I maybe saw 5 hands in the room. I will tell you this, one utility that might have 2 million meters, and you just look at a metrology basis only, measuring 10 to 12 times a day. So that's not even what David said about 15-minute intervals. That's 2-hour intervals. You're looking at a petabyte of data per year just for that one utility. Okay? That's just meters alone. I can guarantee you that data is going into the billing management system. What happens after that is an opportunity for you to present that back to the utility, to massage that data and do something with it to better manage their end state.
Well, that's a good question. So you think that that's going to be outsourced, all of it, or are the utilities going to become Google and Amazon and start creating these giant server farms to
to handle it themselves.
Yeah, so hosting the data and running the analytics are two different things, at least from my perspective. I mean, you can easily outsource the hosting of data, but actually running intelligent analytics and deriving some statistical ahas from it to manage your business differently is the key. But let's see, is this going to work? So just very quickly, because I don't want to go through carrier nauseum for you guys, but I'd be happy to do it after the panel if you want. But you have to keep in mind who your end customer is when you're working with utilities. They provide a societal good and a societal need. And as I was telling a customer, if you imagine what would it be to live without power for 24 hours or several days, that's the customer that you're selling into. That's the way utilities think. So sometimes they're being criticized as being slow moving. Well, people will die if they lose power, and so they're being held to that standard.
You mean they're not going to die if they don't have their iPhone?
Yeah. Well, communications, I would argue, ranks up there as well. I mean, you all count on Sprint and all the other carriers to complete your calls when you need them, and for those calls to stay up. And so technology migration in that same vein, they are very willing to take on new technology and to evaluate it, but keep in mind it's a long deployment process. I could call up a utility today and say, hey, I met somebody out of the valley here. They have this great product. It's ready to go. And they say, ship me a couple of them. They'll be ready to do it. But to go through a mass deployment, it takes a lot of vetting and a lot of time to get through that. Energy efficiency and environmental. David was talking about the impact of plug-in electric vehicles. It's pretty significant. I mean, if you think about the Huey household, we might be consuming 24 kilowatt hours a day. You look at a Chevy Volt and you're doubling the Huey household, on a daily basis. So it's pretty key to provide that. These are the areas that they're looking at. Network longevity. When they make an investment, they want to make sure that that network is around. They don't want any surprises a year or two into the deployment. So that puts a lot of pressure on Sprint and the other carriers to stand behind embedding communications into those products. And then you have customer trends, societal issues going on with energy panel. The energy panel that Kurt was talking about, that was one of the areas that I think we should talk a little bit more about, especially when it comes to the home area network. Interestingly enough, X10 has been around for years. There's Insteon out there, there's Zigbee. These protocols have been around, but there really hasn't been a mass adoption of it. So the biggest point I would tell you right now is there's an opportunity for you in that space to do it better, to do it differently, but don't expect the utility to drive it because standards need to be put in place. I mean, there's plenty of forecasts from Parks and Associates that would say that the independent in-home energy management systems, thumbs up. That's where it'll be in the next several years. Utility-driven home area networks, and if you're expecting a subsidy from the utility to do that, you're going to have a long wait.
Is the model not unlike the mobile phones? I mean,
you know what? So I was in D.C. About 6 months ago, and somebody asked me a question very similar to that. And the way I responded was, the utility industry is very similar to the telecom industry minus 30 years. Mm-hmm. Okay. You think the first foray into the home was the caller ID box, where you'd purchase the caller ID. That was a non-regulated service, and you would attach the caller ID monthly regulated plan to your bill. Utilities are somewhat like that. They're trying to figure out, okay, am I going to get into the home? Am I going to charge for that? Or am I going to get into the home with just demand response and shut off your pool pump during a peak pricing event and recoup that spinning reserve or conserve power back into the grid? So, there's a couple different things occurring here. Distribution automation, demand response, big items going forward. Interestingly enough, I put a chart up there from U.S. Energy Information Administration. And basically what the chart is saying is renewables, we had heard earlier from a panelist that the state of California assigned 1/3, LA was assigned 30% of renewables by 2020. Those are somewhat of an isolated event, but from a VC perspective, areas that you want to be looking in are the microgrid generation. Okay, I call it microgrid. It's photovoltaic and it's wind. And the reason why is everybody, you can put a PV array on this building. You can make the meter run backwards, so to speak, right? The problem is, and we heard some people talk about, but nobody's addressing the issue, is that the real value to the utility. If you tell the utility that, they say, all right, that's excellent. But then you go to the utility and say, I will aggregate those PV panels across a metro area, and I will inject reactive power back into the grid. So in a sense, I become a microgrid generator, and I can either offer that to you, or I can work with the ISO to do that.
What about microgrid storage facilities as well?
It's possible, but the opportunity for you is designing the microgrid equipment, the inverters, but also who is that middle player? Who is that person that's going to pull it together? Who's going to be the app shop, or that's an overused term? But who is going to be the person that's going to go out and negotiate with the different customers and aggregate that data, and then control those inverters and inject that back into the grid? That's a low-hanging fruit opportunity. It sounds complex, but it really isn't. It just needs somebody to come up with a business model for it. And then here's the slide I was talking about, the HAN. If you think that you're going to get the utility to subsidize your HAN deployment, I would say it's going to be a long road just due to standards, let alone rate recovery and regulation. And wow, I spoke a long time. All right, I'm going to stop. We're based
you got
out
interrupted a lot.
Yeah, we're based out of Burlingame, and we have an M10 center down there. And that's where we prototype a lot of our M10 equipment across all verticals, including utilities. So,
thank you. Michelle, I'm going to ask just a couple of questions of the panel, and I want to start with you, and then we'll open it up. But would you agree with Brian's assessment of the sort of slow rate of change at the utilities? I mean, you're selling into the utilities.
Yeah, you have to understand that this is a culture shift. I mean, how they were used to doing business and how we're going to be doing business going forward is massive change within their organization. You've got small pockets within the utility that are ready to be innovative. Some utilities are even setting up what I would call advanced technologies groups to start looking at and incubating some of these technologies. But then when you look at full-scale deployment, there are additional technical challenges and the consumer engagement aspect that have to be addressed. And utilities, the last thing they want to do is upset their rate base. And then you've got regulators that won't make a decision to move forward on something unless they feel...
Are we talking PG&E here?
Any utility. They won't let them move forward with anything unless they know the rate base and the ratepayers will be protected. And so by walking into a Best Buy or one of these other stores, driving your own empowerment of that usage, demanding the utility give you visibility and access to it, you can create a market and start helping the utilities deploy technologies faster.
John, you talked a little bit about social behaviors and how the utilities have to get their heads around that. How is that going to happen? Is that going to happen quickly, or will technology start to change the kind of culture that Michelle's talking about?
Well, I think the private sector, the non-regulated smart grid players are the ones that are going to make it happen, and that's what we're seeing again in the example of this startup company called O-Power. A lot of utilities have come to realize that their core competency is making sure there's enough electrons for the ratepayers, but not necessarily to understand consumer behavior. They don't think of them as consumers or customers. And so that's where, again, they're going to rely on external parties, and in many cases startup companies, to bring that value to them. They'll keep on building power plants and making sure the juice gets from point A to point B, but they're going to rely on private sector companies to solve these problems of consumer engagement.
Cool. Yeah. So they could be the next Facebook of smart grid, or are they a little more the next Apple?
It could be. I mean, some entrepreneur has yet to figure out how to harness this platform called Facebook, to figure out how to bring people together in communities to conserve energy. There's actually a startup company that I'm drawing a blank on the name, but they actually tried to do something like this pre-Facebook. But that opportunity is still out there.
Yeah. I really concur. I mean, if you're moving product, if you're a home area network provider and you're moving product through Best Buy, who's bringing that information together? Okay, you can buy your product and go to somebody's portal that only works with your one product, or an innovator can come in and say, here's my application development framework, and this is what I'm going to interface to. This is how you interface with my website, and it's free. And developer, please build that into your platform. And now you begin building that. Was it Oboe?
O-Power.
O-Power like relationship, because remember, O-Power is I think it's a power consumption play, right? It's in a peer pressure kind of thing.
It uses social norms
right.
and behavioral economics science.
Right. So that's one. To cite one of my mentors, the value of a network increases with the applications developed for that network. That's one application of smart grid. But who is doing the other application? Who's giving you events when you want to control devices within your house, and then what framework is being built to centralize that into a portal that can be interfaced to all these different other services.
Well, it's sort of like what they say in social media, that content is king, but context is queen. So
Exactly.
You have to have that as well. Let's open this up for some questions for the panel. Just one sec. Yes, sir. Please. Do we need a mic?
Rick Tidfo. I'm actually not going to identify my employer. I'm going to say I'm representing myself because I'm going to say some nasty things.
Oh, good.
I work really in the trenches and deal with a lot of this stuff every day, and it's actually much worse than any of the panelists have made out. And I really think that it almost warrants, pitchforks and torches, a parade to the PUC. But I can make a suggestion for everyone in this room. If you really want to advance the smart grid and do something for global warming, write the following letter to PG&E and CC it to Mike Peavy at the PUC. And what you should say in that letter is that I want to have access to my energy usage information, and I want people that I designate to have access to my energy usage information, and I want it to follow the NASB energy information usage model. This is something that came through the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel process. It's actually been worked on for many years by many people, and everyone has agreed that this model is the definition of energy usage. Right now, the only way to get your energy usage is to go onto a pretty crummy website and get data that's basically mush at 1 hour resolution, a day at a time. That's what you get from the PG&E site. But if there were an API that gave you access to better information, then 1,000 flowers could bloom, and there would be competition among third parties to actually provide that information in a way that's actually actionable for you. Right now, the way to do that is you have to install a shadow meter. Mm-hmm. And 10 years ago, I started a company that actually has installed shadow meters all over the country in big commercial buildings, and we take that 15-minute usage information and turn it and monetize it. We turn it into dollars, because kilowatt hours don't mean a lot to people, but dollars do.
Right.
So that suggestion, everybody leave tonight, write a letter to the PUC. You can look up the NAESB energy usage information model, or go onto the SGIP site and look at the PAP10 group and tell your utility and the PUC that that's what you want to see. Thanks.
Okay. Be sure to put your answer in the form of a question, but thank you for your statement. Who is up? Who else would like to ask the panel something?
I'm Greg Connon. I was president of the PUC during the formative years where we tried to open the market to competition. In a way, I want to defend us. In another way, I want to tell you where I see the future. I think I spent 4 years of my life trying to open up the market and get real-time pricing on an hourly basis. I spent 4 years of my life. And I went to Europe, I went to Asia. I went all over the world to figure out how to do it. And we figured out how to do it. And it was predicated on real-time pricing with real-time meters. And we issued the order in April 20th of 1994. And we could not get the meters installed. It took 15 years, and those meters are now installed. So all the ingredients are there. And it's not Mike Peavy and I don't know who the other CC was too. It's the legislature. It's the Assembly and the Senate. They're limiting the amount of retail access that can be put in the electric industry. If you could open that up, as we envisioned in 1994, where you'd have competition and real-time pricing, where you'd have hourly pricing, you could save 30 to 40% of your bill every month in every household in California. So I think that's the model, and I'm going to try and start a company to do that if I could ever stop long enough to figure out how I'm going to do that. But I am going to do it. And so I guess the question is, and Kurt said it, I mean, he said that there's 30 to 40% savings from real-time pricing, but you've got to get the legislature, not the commission, but the legislature to open the market up. And the powers that are stopping that, I don't know who they are. I've lost track. But there are a lot of them, and they're fighting it. They don't want that market to open. Right now, if you could have retail access, this thing would happen 10 years faster than you're visualizing. So I just encourage you to write that letter to the legislature, to the chief of the Senate and the Assembly, and tell them that they're holding up innovation and creativity in Silicon Valley because they won't open the market to competition.
I think we're having a revival meeting here. This is great.
Well, I mean,
let's get a question though for the panel. But it's a really good point.
Do you agree?
Yeah, there you go. Michelle, I'm sorry, Michelle wants to say something.
Oh,
I should
no,
have an answer.
You know, you think of those legislators, they're customers as well. And when you look across the customer base, how much understanding do they have of what smart grid really is? And how do you get them educated so that they can make better decisions and actually get this thing moving?
Right.
So in a quick response to the former commissioner, I just want to say, I do have a question, by the way, is that I work for the city of Sunnyvale, and you know, around Earth Day, there's like a green tech, clean tech, smart grid conference every hour.
Right.
And on several panels, people have been saying, if you want to get the attention of a legislative body, don't speak in technology, speak in number of jobs you will put in their district. So if you want to write a letter, add the number of jobs you plan to create.
Well, good point. But I mean, so one of the things we were wanting to talk about is will the utilities outsource development? Will they outsource? We're talking about outsourcing data management. I mean, if you know, outsource is not a word that a politician wants to hear because they just assume it's going to be offshored. And if you look at the development of a lot of clean tech now, China, Germany are taking the real lead in that. Do you think that, show of hands, I'll ask the question and then I'll ask the panel, is this going to be an important political consideration going forward? Are we going to have to make sure that the jobs that are created here in the United States?
Whenever money's involved, politics closely follows.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, if you just listen to the first three comments, they're all regulatory related. And so that highlights, I mean, right or wrong, we know why the PUCs are there, and it evolved out of the gold plate standard from the telecom days. But that's who your customer, the utility, and I go back to a couple of speaking points we had, that's who, if you're selling into the utility, that's the environment that they're being measured against, and that they are, or some might say constrained with. Right? There are some utilities that are much more forward-thinking beyond the D-mark, and then there are others that say my PUC won't allow me to get beyond the home.
And how much of that is a function of leadership? Is it really depends? I mean, you have sort of everything from Jim Rogers to whomever. I mean, is that really a function of who's at the top of the company, or is it not?
Yeah,
I think it varies by, you know, all politics are local,
right.
And the local politics will dictate the local business policy.
Right.
And
I
there are
agree
some
more.
utilities that are headquartered in coal-producing states
Right.
who have no interest not only in smart grid and renewable energy, they're not even interested in basic energy efficiency.
Right.
So,
Because that means burning less coal.
Yep.
So that's why, some of the earlier comments were we need federal energy policy, we need federal authority to make sure that some of these technologies move in all 50 states with all 3,000 utilities, because we have to overcome some political lack of inertia in certain areas.
Right.
Questions from the audience?
So I actually had a question.
Oh,
which
great.
Was, since we have GE, Intel, and Sprint on stage, Wi-Fi, RF technology. I mean, you're all backing different platforms, so which is better and which one are you going to continue to back?
Well, so
Wi-Fi, right? Wi-Fi.
we're all friends up here. So, I'll tell you where I see activity. I see, obviously, I'm a carrier, so I see activity in the CDMA space, as well as in WiMAX with GridNet. As CDMA is secure, it hasn't been hacked. And when you start talking about to a utility about doing demand response events, so that's where I'm shutting off your pool pump, and it's going to occur between a certain window when I have a peak pricing event. And if I send a message and all of your pool pumps don't shut off, I get a brownout event or a blackout event. In that case, they are not relying on insecure technologies or technologies that somebody turned the power off to the router. Now, there are other partners that I do have that clearly use Wi-Fi as the egress, but you have to keep in mind, take ourselves outside this room and into all of the stakeholders that are across the U.S. There's still broadband penetration that lacks, the numbers need to be somewhat desirable, so you need a secure networking technology that egress that information out of. And I was talking to a customer today about this. It also occurs in the healthcare segment. A heart patient monitor, you're not going to egress that over a Wi-Fi network. You're going to do it.
The other panelists want to answer that?
Yeah.
So I would say it depends on the application.
Yes.
There's trade-offs on all these communication technologies. They've all attracted a fair amount of venture capital and entrepreneurs. But my basic philosophy is don't undercall how much data you're going to have to move. So we believe that broadband is better than narrowband. Cheaper to get the fat pipes out there now, even if it costs a little bit more up front. Because we're probably going to need them again with the explosion of data that we're talking about, and because we're not smart enough to figure out what sort of services some entrepreneur might want to deploy on a broadband network in the future. Let's just make the infrastructure available and then let the innovation unfold.
Michelle?
And you're going to see utilities. I mean, keep in mind that not every customer is located in a metropolitan area or a place where we might have that infrastructure rolled out. So you're going to see utilities evolve, and maybe they start with a power line, but eventually move towards CDMA or other technology as the infrastructure is built out in the Dakotas or somewhere else.
Right, and keep in mind, that's exactly right, because utilities will rely on private networking technology for their switches or their zero crossing switchovers, right? And they will rely on public wireless or Wi-Fi for other technologies as well. So
Okay, we have time for one more question. You get something from
This is,
right over there. Oh, I'm sorry. You're in charge. Okay. One more question.
This is sort of not so much a question as a comment, and sort of speaking to the person that shall remain nameless over there, the organization that shall remain nameless. I think one of the biggest failures that I'm seeing in terms of utilities right now and an opportunity is, how many people in this room know what an iPhone is, right? And by the way, the iPhone was the 10th, 15th, or 20th device that could get on the internet, but they had an incredible amount of marketing behind them, and everybody understands what the iPhone is. One of the issues that I'm seeing, I live in a neighborhood where every house has a smart meter on it, and my neighbors ask me, "What do you do for a living?" I work in smart grid security. The question I get is, what's a smart meter, or what's a smart grid? And I walk them to the side of their house and put their hand on the smart meter, and they go, "Oh yeah, I hear these things cause brain cancer," or something like that. How they understand the smart
I think
meter,
GE
smart
needs to
grid.
spend more time on smart grid advertising.
So one of the failures
More
that I'm
money.
seeing is I went on a peak usage program. I saw my bill actually drop 40%. And by the way, that's impossible without a smart meter.
right.
I think the big failure is that utility companies, or maybe the PUC, or maybe both, are really failing to market and to raise awareness to the consumer about what the benefits of the smart grid are.
That's a really good point, but keep in mind too that marketing itself is being revolutionized. So you can't do it the same way that you used to. You have to use different tools to engage people and to really turn hearts and minds. So I want to try to get in one more question before we stop. Do you want to?
Left.
Okay, got one more. Oh.
So the panelists had identified that the petabytes of data coming in every day are going to cause or engender a opportunity for data analytics. So the question I have is, number one, how big in terms of financial revenue generated could that be for companies hoping to get into that area? So is there enough financial incentive for somebody to start a company to address that problem? And second, if you work on a pilot basis with one utility, do you solve a universal problem, or are you going to have to resolve the problem for every utility you go to? Thank you.
That's a really great question. I mean, if you look at it in terms of marketing data, what's Facebook worth now? And basically, their business model is based on an enormous amount of aggregation of marketing data. But I won't answer that question. Anybody want to take a stab at what's the number out there for analytics that are coming from consumers all across the country?
I can't cite any specific numbers, but we see a lot of the activity in the entrepreneurship community around this space. And in the short term, it's about taking the fairly limited amount of data that's available and using things like inference technologies and artificial intelligence in order to analyze and do data mining and make recommendations on how a homeowner or how a building owner might be able to reduce their energy use. As more and more sensors get deployed, or as more of the sensor data becomes available, then the opportunity will expand. But this is an area where other industries have transformed themselves. Manufacturing industries using statistical process control. It's all factories. Modern factories are run entirely on real-time data. That's how you get efficiencies. That's how you reduce costs. The same will occur with this industry.
Yeah, I was really lucky to hear Malcolm Gladwell speak yesterday, and he was talking about his theory around home team advantage and how referees have now improved their decision making by a third, reducing home team advantage because of the instant replay. It's that availability of reliable, persuasive data that can really change decision making. And maybe that's what we're all trying to work on.
And in this industry, it's not just about saving money or saving energy. It's about ensuring reliability. The industry's been great at delivering high degree of uptime, but again, as we add more complexity to the grid, more spurious events, it becomes one big kind of stochastic process of windmills turning on and off, solar panels turning on and off, electric vehicles being plugged and unplugged. And so that level of complexity is just going to require an enormous amount of real-time analytics in order just to have the control mechanisms in place to ensure reliability. So that's where we think it's in the embedded analytics where there's going to be a growth opportunity.
And if you look at the transmission distribution grid side, not just the analytics around the consumer data, but imagine condition-based maintenance for those assets. And if you're on performance-based rates, if you can take care of that asset before it becomes critical and keep your reliability up, you as a utility can potentially make more money. So if you can put analytics and algorithms around condition-based maintenance of the assets, that's another area.
Brian, do you want to close that out, that discussion?
Yeah, I think the way to answer his question is we could cite your VC venture that you funded with OPO, or is it OPO?
We're not.
Right.
We didn't fund them, but
right.
I think they're just a good example.
So that's
of
one
a
example. And then Michelle was alluding to grid transmission, or you could go to the fax system, which will save 30% on an existing line. That's another bullet. That's another point. If you just kind of bring it up a level where you start thinking about Metcalfe's law, and you're interconnecting all these different devices, and the value of the network increases exponentially with each new device that you connect to the network, which is generating data. That's why I come back to the takeaway that I wanted to leave you all with was of the 4 opportunities to look at, that person that's pulling those analytics together and creating kind of like an app shop, for lack of better words or metaphor, to do something with that data is the opportunity.
That's a great way to close. We're out of time. No, we didn't get to everyone's questions, but the panelists will be around, and look forward to talking to all of you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, panelists, very much. Appreciate it. We are a little bit behind time, so what time do you all have on your watches? We'll be back here, and we'll just take a 10-minute break, so be back here at 2:50, and we'll continue on. Thank you very much.